All right, friends, here we are. It's Thursday night, so that means we're in Bible study. We've been working our way through the life of David now for a while. I was looking at my notes back in the spring, even before March. We have made our way down through chapter 30 of 1 Samuel. That's where we're going to pick up this evening, and depending on how things go, we may finish up 1 Samuel this evening. As you may remember from the last time we were together, things are getting pretty dicey and scary for old King Saul, and we'll see the end of Saul probably before we finish this evening. So, if you want to find 1 Samuel 30 in your Bible, that would be fantastic. And I'll say this, that if you would like a copy of any of these maps that we have, let me know. I can email them to you. I can print them and have copies available. We'd be happy to help you get that. And if you need a Bible, let me know. All right, so 1 Samuel chapter 30. David and his men reached Ziklag on the third day. Now the Amalekites had raided the Negev and Ziklag. They had attacked Ziklag and burned it, and had taken captive the women and everyone else in it, both young and old. They killed none of them, but carried them off as they went on their way. When David and his men reached Ziklag, they found it destroyed by fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. So David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. David's two wives had been captured, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. Each one was bitter in spirit because of his sons and daughters, but David found strength in the Lord his God. Then David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, "Bring me the ephod." Abiathar brought it to him, and David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them?" "Pursue them," he answered. "You will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue." We'll pause right there. Okay, so as you remember from last week, David and his 600 men have been a part of the Philistine war machine that was moving north to fight Saul up in the northern end of the Israelite kingdom, up near Mount Gilboa. So here's Israel. So Ziklag is right down here, straight west of the Dead Sea. They have come from Aphek, I don't know how to say it. That is where King Achish of Gath said, "Hey, why don't you go on home? Because my people don't trust you. I trust you, but they think you're going to do something bad." Fine. So they turned around and traveled what is probably 75 or 80 miles back south, while the rest of them are heading toward Mount Gilboa, which is over here right next to the Jordan River. It overlooks the valley of Jezreel and the Jordan River Valley right here. Okay, so it's a long walk to go fight the Philistines, to go fight the Israelites for the Philistines.
Days, right? Days? Weeks?
Yes. So what we find here is that David and his 600 men made the trip from Aphek back down to Ziklag in 3 days. That is about 75 miles. So they're moving pretty fast. I don't walk quite that fast for that long. They're moving along pretty well. And when they get there, after 3 days of troop transport, they find their home base of Ziklag destroyed. The city has been plundered, and all of their families have been carried away by the Amalekite raiders. They're going to be sold into slavery, probably to Egyptians, because Egyptians will just buy anybody. Okay, so remember the Amalekites? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. They're right there in verse 1 of chapter 30. The Amalekites had raided the Negev and Ziklag. Way back in 1 Samuel 15, the Lord gave Saul a very clear mission. I want you to go up against the Amalekites, and I want you to repay them for the insult and the harm done to Israel by the Amalekites when Moses was leading Israel out of Egypt. So this has been like 400 years ago, but God says, you're going to be my source of vindication and revenge. Go get rid of all the Amalekites. And you may remember that there should be no survivors. There would be no plundering. There would be no spoils of the battle. They were going to eliminate and eradicate them, period. And do you remember how Saul carried that out?
He just took the king hostage.
He took King Agag as a prisoner of war, which probably, if you're the royal prisoner of war, it's a very different experience than if you're like a foot soldier. And he kept all the very best of everything for himself, supposing that he would make it an offering, but I think that was just when he found out that he was caught. This failure to follow the Lord's clear instructions caused God to remove the rain from Saul and to remove the blessing from Saul. His failure to comply completely here is going to have ramifications for Israel years later, which we're finding out now in 1 Samuel 30. So Amalekite raiding parties, in case Roger gets going there. Amalekite raiding parties have been attacking through the Negev. The Negev is anything between the range of mountains here and the south. So really kind of all of this is the Negev region. And then on a better map, which I don't have, you might see, do I have one close? Of course not. Nope, still not here. Okay, this will have to do. Okay, so here's the Dead Sea, here's the Jordan River. So this is a much smaller map, but these people have been raiding all the way from the mountains here, all the way south from Havilah and Shur. Havilah is the very bottom corner down here in the text of the Saudi Arabian peninsula, and the wilderness of Shur is up here. So they've been covering a ton of territory, doing raids, burning villages, taking stuff, finding captives to sell as slaves. So they've that's lots and lots of territory. When they got to David's home base in Ziklag, they captured everybody. They didn't kill anyone. They just took them all captive. They rounded up all the livestock. They took anything that was worth anything, and then they burned the city. So the families of David's 600 men are going to be carried off to slave auction. And the language that is used here indicates that they are all sort of herded off. Women, children, old, young, everybody's sort of herded, being driven like animals to be sold. So you imagine if you have 600 men, just assume that they're all married, there's 600 women plus 2.3 children per family. You know, you're looking at a fairly large number of people, plus all of the livestock, and that doesn't go quickly.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's slow, isn't it?
That's slow, yeah. You don't do anything with speed there. So when David and his men get to Ziklag, they find that the city is sort of smoldering, and they weep aloud until there isn't any weep left in them. That sentence is a powerful one. David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. Hardened soldiers, guerrilla warfare people,
And now they're mad.
Huh?
And now they're mad.
And well, they're mad, but they're also devastated that their families have been carried off. Weeping until there's no strength left to weep, which leaves them sort of, I don't know if it's emotionless, but that doesn't last very long until they start trying to figure out who's in trouble. Whose fault is this? And so it says that David became greatly distressed. It means that he is in a real predicament. He's really stuck. The men are ready to rebel against him, to revolt against him, potentially even kill him, because if we'd been home instead of running off to the Philistines, we would have been here and we could have protected our families, right? But you know, David is right there in the middle of this group. It's not like his family is there with him. His wives and whatever children there may be, his family has been carried off as well. So he's grieving. He is saddened by this tragic loss. And now the men who have been with him for months, maybe even years, are ready to mutiny. So he's also scared about a rebellion. But the last part of verse 6 tells us what about his mental state. David found strength in the Lord his God.
Wow.
David found strength in the Lord his God. His faith in God enabled him to deal with this potentially overwhelming crisis, or two or three. But rather than falling further into despair like King Saul, rather than going deeper into anxiety like Saul, David moves forward in faith. Saul can't really see any farther than his belly button. Woe is me, everything stinks, this is just bad, I don't know what to do, and he just downward spirals darker and darker and deeper and deeper. David, on the other hand, when he is faced with these kind of crises, his faith is firmly in his God. He absolutely believes that God is going to provide for him and fix things. Okay, full of faith. Okay, so we've read verses 7 and 8. So rather than going to find a medium to conduct some kind of a seance and read the crystal ball like Saul did a chapter or two ago, with the medium from Endor, which is way the heck up here at the top. Okay, David says, because I have faith in the Lord my God, I will inquire of the Lord. So he calls for Abiathar, the priest, to come and to bring the ephod, which is probably his uniform as the priest. We've seen the picture not very long ago of the robe, the tunic, the overpiece, the breastplate. You know, it's got this 12 precious stones. It has a little pouch in it where the Urim and Thummim are.
So that's what part of this.
Yep. The high priest's clothes would definitely be a part of that.
This tabernacle has some of that information and tells what all those symbols are and what all the beads mean and everything.
There's one stone for each one of the 12 tribes in rows and columns. Plus, there's this pouch where these two special stones, the Urim and the Thummim, are kept. And we don't really know much about them, exactly how they work, but it seems to be that you ask yes and no questions, kind of like the magic 8-ball of God, you know, and so David does that. Should I go after this raiding party? Will I have success? If all signs point to no, then David won't go do it. But if everything is yes, then David and his men will go after it. And the answer from Abiathar is,
Pursue them.
go get them. You're
You'll
gonna
certainly overtake them.
you're gonna get them.
So does Abiathar, was he with David when they were marching? Because if he'd been in Ziklag, he would have been dead or captured.
I believe that Abiathar is always with David.
Okay.
From the moment that all of the priests got killed, except for Abiathar a few chapters ago up at Nob, I believe that Abiathar has been looking for a bodyguard and somebody who's promised to take care of him.
Oh, okay.
So now, with that one, I guess I could use. No, none of those are good. This is the best one I got. Okay, so on this map, which is backwards for you people watching on YouTube. Okay, so
Oh, there's Ziklag.
I forget I have this big one behind me. So Ziklag is down here, one of these two places down here out from the Dead Sea. The raiders have been in the Negev, and so they have sort of tracked them part way down with a little bit of help. David and his men are at a place called the Besor Valley or Ravine. They're about 15 miles south of Ziklag. And as they're camped, they determined that of the 600 men, 200 of them are just absolutely exhausted. They cannot go on. Now just remember, they have been on a 3-day, 25-mile-a-day hike. Plus, they have gotten this news, overwhelming news, that their families have been captured, their homes have been burned, and everything they own has been carried off. They've had a pretty bad day. And so, for a third of David's battalion, squad, I don't even know what the right word would be for that many people, but a third of them are described with words that have to do with corpses. Essentially, they are dead tired. They just cannot go on. So David chooses, as the leader, he says, you 200 men stay here with the supplies, with the equipment. You guard this while the rest of us will go on to pursue this raiding party and rescue our families.
And they're walking, not riding horses?
I believe everybody is walking.
So they leave the 200 in Ziklag?
A little south of Ziklag, at this place called the Besor Valley.
Right here.
Okay.
Somewhere, well, right here. There's the river. It says the Besor River right in there. So they're down in this region, and they've got a little bit farther to go to find them. You might pass some of those around to anybody who may have come in late.
Anybody.
Is there a new one?
I will share.
No, she just does.
Thank you.
That is great.
Thank
Can you read that?
That I can.
Okay, good.
Okay, so as they make their way, I imagine following the tracks of 15 or 1,600 people, plus animals, and the raiding party. I mean, at one point, the raiding party is well more than 400 of these Amalekites. So they're trailing them, and on the way they find this Egyptian slave. He is starving. He is dehydrated. He's had nothing to eat or drink for 3 days. He was abandoned because he was too sick by his Amalekite master. And so, sorry, stinks to be you. I guess you're just going to die here in the wilderness. David and his men come upon him, and David has some compassion. Gives him things to drink, gives him food to eat, gets him all perked up, and says, tell you what, why don't you help us figure out where these Amalekites are? Do you know where they're going? Oh yeah, I know where they're going. But you got to promise me, you won't hurt me, and you won't give me back to my master. I'll help you out, but those are my conditions. So the Egyptian informs David of the Amalekites' locations and what their plans are. So David and his troop now of 400 men follow the instructions. They find the Amalekite raiding party, which we've said is moving pretty slowly to have all that going on. Rustling livestock is not a quick job. So they have stopped for the night, and the raiders are resting. They've got big fires going. They're drinking. They're eating. They're celebrating. They're going through jewelry. They're putting on people's clothes. I mean, they're celebrating. The language says that they really are partying. This is a big deal. They're having a great time, and it is going on into the wee small hours of the night, potentially even into the next morning. And so David and his men bide their time until just before dawn. And that's when they choose to attack. Everybody's finally too drunk, and they are too tired from all their messing around. That's the ideal time. So they fight then essentially from dawn to dusk of that later that day. Several hours of fighting, and before it's all over, 400 Amalekite raiders escape somehow. They take off on their camels. Okay, so that's the leftovers of the Amalekite raiding party is 400 men on camels.
That's a lot.
That's what's left over. That's the part that escaped. That doesn't count everybody who's been killed and the horse they rode in on. Okay, so this is a big deal. This is a big party, and David and his men have incredible success, just like the Lord had indicated that they would. You will overtake them, and so by the time we get down to verses 18 to 24. Things have changed. I realize now we've skipped over some verses. We should go back and read them. David and the 600 men with him came to the Besor Valley, where some stayed behind. 200 of them were too exhausted to cross the valley, but David and the other 400 continued the pursuit. They found an Egyptian in a field and brought him to David. They gave him water to drink and food to eat. I like how they give us the menu. Part of a cake of pressed figs and 2 cakes of raisins, which I almost brought for a snack tonight. He ate and was revived, for he had not eaten any food or drunk any water for 3 days and 3 nights. David asked him, "Who do you belong to? Where do you come from?" He said, "I'm an Egyptian, the slave of an Amalekite. My master abandoned me when I became ill 3 days ago. We raided the Negev of the Kerethites, some territory belonging to Judah, and the Negev of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag." David asked him, "Can you lead me down to this raiding party?" He answered, "Swear to me before God that you will not kill me or hand me over to my master, and I'll take you down to them." Scout's honor. He led David down, and there they were, scattered over the countryside. Well, they'd have to be with as many of them as there are. Eating, drinking, and reveling, that's partying, because of the great amount of plunder that they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from Judah. David fought them from dusk until the evening of the next day, and none of them got away except 400 young men who rode off on camels and fled. David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken, including his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, young or old, boy or girl, plundered or anything else they had taken. David brought everything back. He took all the flocks and herds, and his men drove them ahead of the other livestock, saying, "This is David's plunder."
So I wonder, when all this happened, if the partiers were over here and and David's, the people from Ziklag were over here, how did he keep them all separate? Partiers were over here and these guys were too exhausted to care. So that's how he knew this was who he was gonna get? I just asked.
I know you're asking. I'm trying to figure out if I understand the question.
Well, so
There's clearly some space between where he left his 200 men who are guarding their camp.
No, he fought them from dusk until evening of the next day,
Yeah.
and none of them got away. So, the group of
The Amalekites.
yeah, they were over here, and all the people that they captured were over here, right?
Well, I'm sure that they were all
Intermingled?
under a guard.
Okay.
Yeah, the Amalekites may have been drunken raiders, but they still are smart enough to say, okay, you guys got to watch the stuff.
Okay.
We're taking turns.
I just wondered why none of his people got killed. I guess that's the way it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You do not need to apologize. This is David's plunder. Verse 21, then David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow him and who were left behind at the Besor Valley. They came out to meet David and the men with him. As David and his men approached, he asked them how they were. But all the evil men and troublemakers among David's followers said, because they didn't go out with us, we will not share with them the plunder we recovered. However, each man may take his wife and children and go.
Oh, human nature.
David replied, no, my brothers, you must not do that with what the Lord has given us. He has protected us and delivered into our hands the raiding party that came against us. Who will listen to what you say? The share of the man who stayed with the supplies is to be the same as that of him who went down to the battle. All will share alike. David made this a statute and ordinance for Israel from that day to this. When David reached Ziklag, he sent some of the plunder to the elders of Judah, who were his friends, saying, "Here's a gift for you from the plunder of the Lord's enemies." David sent it to those who were in Bethel, Ramoth, Negev, and Jatir, to those at Aror, Sifmoth, Eshtemoth, and Rakal, to those in the towns of the Jerahmeelites and the Kenites, to those in Hormah, Bor Ashan, Athak, and Hebron, and to those in all the other places where he and his men had roamed.
Wow.
Okay, so now I've read that, I can go back and just talk a little bit. So verses 18 to 24 tell us that David had great success. They got everything back and then some, because the raiders had been collecting stuff for a while. Every place that they'd gone, they collected more stuff. So David ended up with all of it. The families are reunited. There is not one person missing. There is not one thing missing. The Lord has brought them victory. He has brought them blessing. Israel is getting blessed by God one more time. So when they go back to the river valley to meet up with the guys that they left behind, there are some amongst a group of 400 who say, you didn't fight. Why should you get anything? There's your wife, there's your kids, go. We did all the hard work. We did everything that we were supposed to do. You just took a nap here and ate raisins and figs and honey and whatever. You've been on R&R while we've been off in combat. You don't get anything. And David said, oh no. And diplomatically he says, no, my brothers. That's not how this is going to work. We're all together. We are a band of brothers. We are an army together. We are battling for the Lord's people. God is the one who has given us success. God didn't give some success here and nothing here. We all have a part to play. We will all share in the blessing together. You don't get 400 and they get 0. Everybody's getting 200. Okay? Now, I think that David very clearly has a much better attitude than these men. The evil men, the troublemakers, they're clearly very selfish people, very aggressive people. And David, as the future king, steps in and says, this is not going to work. We will not do things this way. If everybody is in the battle because they're all in the Lord's army, God has given the blessing to all of them. They will all share in the treasure. And it's beyond just the military men. He didn't just say, all right, boys, go in and pick up as much as you can carry. We'll divide it out, sacks full of whatever. He said, this is what you all get. And then they went to all the places where they had been in their wandering. And the names that they list really are kind of like every place. There's Aurora, there's Hormah, so any place that they've been, they take some of this plunder back to say, God has given us victory, God has blessed us. Here's something for you and your people too who have suffered. David is a generous man. He is a wise man. He's acting much more kingly and royal than maybe we have seen him in a little while. I know Shirley is still mad at him for 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, he's back in tune with God again, I guess.
Clearly, because there was that little period there when he was really chummy with the Philistines that we didn't read much about any new songs of worship to God. He didn't write any psalms. And he hasn't inquired of the Lord, even though he's got a priest in his back pocket. But here, maybe it's because they've experienced this horrible loss, he kind of gets slapped back into reality a little bit, like, oh yeah, I've been an idiot. I need to be about the Lord's business. I'm going to inquire what the Lord's plan is. And so now he is all the way back in where he needs to be. I don't know if you know anybody else like that when things get really scary and stinky and awful, they go, I need to turn around. I need to get back to God.
That's what brings people back a lot, is hard times, huh?
And that is one of the things that when I don't know what else to pray for some people, that's what I pray. Lord, I just hope that before they get all the way down to the bottom of the pit,
Yes.
that they will turn around and realize that they need you.
Yes.
But some people have to be flat on their back, staring up at the sky,
Rock bottom.
thinking it cannot get any worse. I got no place to go down. This is it.
So, are they leaving Ziklag now?
Well, we're going to find that out in the next chapter.
Yet. Okay.
Chapter 1. So I will say that David is acting like a king, somebody that you want to respect and follow, instead of just a kind of a rammy, laser-focused warrior. He's thinking with all of his brain and not just his shoot-to-kill brain. Okay? What do you think? You want to start chapter 31? I got 1 page of notes.
Sure.
It's ugly and sad.
Ugh.
All right.
Let's get her done.
Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell dead on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me." But his armor bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When the armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his own sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor bearer and all his men died together that same day. When the Israelites along the valley and those across the Jordan saw that the Israelite army had fled and that Saul and his sons had died, they abandoned their towns and fled, and the Philistines came and occupied them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head, they stripped off his armor, and they sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. They put his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreths and fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. When the people of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their valiant men marched through the night to Bethshan. They took down the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall of Bethshan and went to Jabesh, where they burned them. Then they took their bones and buried them under a tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days. Lots of sad. Okay, so let me remind you that back in chapter 28, after Saul had consulted with the medium from Endor, back when he was really anxious and really confused, and Samuel said, well, you know what, this time tomorrow you'll be with me as a ghost. The battle had gone on that next day. The Philistines attacked the next day. We were away from this part of the story. We did a little deke over here to deal with Saul and Ziklag and everything that happened there. And so now in chapter 31, we pick back up this story arc with Saul again. One commentary gave a very sad description of this chapter as the culmination of Saul's progressive alienation from God. Progressive alienation from God. I can't think of a better way to describe Saul's life. He was blessed by God. He was anointed by the Lord. He had his Holy Spirit, and the longer he went, the farther and the farther and the farther away he got from God. And even when he got so far away, even when he had an inkling that maybe he should reach out to God, God just was done with him, because he had been so rebellious for so long and had absolutely turned his back on everything.
So I wonder if that means that he's just gonna go to hell.
I don't know.
We don't know that.
I don't know that. It would seem unlikely that he would, if given the opportunity, that he would choose to believe that Jesus was the Lamb of God sent to save the world.
So when David was doing wrong, he probably always still believed in God, right? Just maybe drifted away from focus.
That's what I would believe. Like many of us, we believe in God, we trust that he's there, we're counting on his grace and his mercy and forgiveness, but we're still making stupid, boneheaded, selfish decisions until we decide, this is foolish, I need to get back.
And sometimes we're out of tune with the Holy Spirit. It's like if you're not actively doing things to
the Holy Spirit's going, hey,
yeah,
hey,
you have to make it a priority.
Till your shoulders sore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Saul's life and Saul's reign as the king were ruined because of that progressive alienation, that growing separateness from the Lord God. So, in the last day, while we've been doing this other stuff, in the last day, the Philistines and Israel have been fighting in the vicinity of Mount Gilboa, which is here. They all started from here, the 5 armies from the 5 cities of the Philistines, marched all the way up here from Aphek to Mount Gilboa. They'd sent David south because he was a troublemaker, and they were suspicious of him. So he went this way, they went that way, and so they've been fighting against Saul, really not for very long, but it is not going well. Mount Gilboa is actually not just one peak. It is really a whole ridge that's kind of shaped kind of like a boomerang. So part of it overlooks this way, the valley of Jezreel. Part of it looks this way over the Jordan River Valley. I'm assuming that in a few months I'll actually get to see it. They've been pursuing Saul. It says the men of Israel have fled. A lot of the army has turned tail and run while the Philistines are pursuing them. And so Saul and his 3 sons and their guards, their attendants, have been like focused on by the Philistines. The 3 sons that are with Saul, Jonathan, who is David's best friend,
Yeah.
and Abinadab and Malchishua, all 3 of them are killed in the battle. Now there is another son. There's a 4th son, Ishbosheth, that we'll read about later on. Ishbosheth.
Okay.
I know,
I just
I
asked,
read the
I
Bible,
want
I
to hear you
can't
say it again.
pronounce all these words.
I can never
Jane fakes his
remember
way
from
through
one
it.
time to the
He'll learn all
next.
these words different when he goes over there,
Probably.
but that's okay.
Ishbosheth is either too young or has another responsibility someplace else. He's not there. And so 3 sons are killed. Saul has been mortally wounded by the archers of the Philistines. And so in verse 4, we get another glimpse into Saul's mental and emotional state very clearly. The original language there says that we'll wait till the plane goes over.
Sometimes it just sounds like they're gonna land on a crash on the road.
Well, and sometimes they do land in the
I
parking
know,
lot.
on the head or on, yeah.
That's why your cross is moving like
It says that Saul is that he writhed exceedingly in fear. That's what the actual language says. He's writhing exceedingly, so he's writhing, wiggling, squirming, totally freaked out by what's going on.
Not in pain, but in fear.
Yes, he is in despair. He knows what's about to happen. Everybody around him is dead or gone. He has his armor bearer there. Would probably prefer to be someplace else, and so with his critical wound, he says, if those dirty Philistines find me alive,
they'll kill me anyway.
I will be praying for death. They will
Yes.
they will abuse me.
They'll torture.
They will torture me. They will humiliate me. I don't want to go through that. Sword guy, kill me. He's afraid of what might come. Don't let me fall into their hands. And wisely and respectfully, the armor bearer says, no, I can't do that. I mean, it's not unlike what David has said all along, that he is not going to raise his hand against the Lord's anointed king. I'm not going to harm you. I'm not going to go against you. I won't do it. And so because he refuses to, Saul props himself up, falls on his own sword, and ends his life. And then the armor bearer, rather than being captured or punished later by somebody, friend or foe, the armor bearer also falls on his sword.
Yeah.
So much sadness, so much despair, so much death. The king, his sons, their guard, their attendants, they're all dead.
Did Saul bring that on himself?
Absolutely, all the way along. His that creeping separation from God, his unwillingness to be obedient to the Lord is what has brought this about. You might remember that back in the middle of the book, back in chapter 16, that Saul's mission had been eliminate the enemy, get rid of the Philistines. That's what he was going to do. As the king, you're going to get rid of all of them. And now here he is, taking his own life because he's afraid of the enemy that he was supposed to kill. And so the text tells us that everybody got out of Dodge. Anybody who lived in any village anywhere close by left. They evacuated. And so the Philistines, if they wanted to, just march on in and take it over, find new place, new house, new stuff, new livestock. They left everything behind. So the next day, the day after the battle is over, the enemy is going through to pick up swords and spears and whatever it is that you do after a battle, making sure everybody's really all the way dead and that kind of stuff. So they discover the bodies of Saul and his sons on the side of Mount Gilboa. And everybody went, ew, because it's right. They take off his head. They strip him of his armor. I'm assuming they've stripped him of everything. And then they begin to display the bodies of the royal family as they make their way back home in their victory parade, swinging Saul's head, taking the various pieces of his armor to this temple and that temple of their idols, their gods. They've sent some of it every place to show that the Philistine gods have given us victory over the Israelites, and it is a totally humiliating thing. They've taken the bodies of the family, hung them up on the wall at this town of Beth Shan. They're celebrating, and when Israel hears about it, they are devastated and angered and moved. So in the middle of the night, it calls them valiant men, brave, patriotic, devoted, loyal men
To Saul.
To Saul or to Israel in general. These men marched 13 or 14 miles in the dark to get to Beth Shan, where they take down the bodies of Saul and his sons. They bring them back to Jabesh Gilead, and in a move that is not typical for Israelites, they burn the bodies. Now we might think, well, that's really disrespectful. I think it's the opposite.
They don't want them disrespected any further.
That's right. If they're buried, they're put into a tomb, then the Philistines can come and take the bodies back and mutilate them or humiliate them some more. And so they do a quick cremation, and whatever is left, they bury underneath a tree in Jabesh Gilead. And then, out of respect, the folks from Jabesh Gilead fast for a week in their grief. The king has been killed. His sons have been killed. Israel's been defeated by their enemies. It is a sad, dark time.
Whether you like the king or not.
Yeah.
But these men were not David.
These are not David's men. These are men loyal to king and country.
Mm-hmm.
But David would also say that he himself is actually loyal to king and country. It's just that the king didn't want him around.
He could have killed him at one point, and he chose not to.
If you're curious, we don't know exactly when Saul's reign started or how old he was when he started, but the end of his reign is probably sometime around 1010 BC, which would make that something like 3,032 years ago. So it's been a minute. And that brings us to the end of King Saul, with a hope and the prospect of greater and better things for David and for Israel, which we'll pick up next time in 2 Samuel. Next time. Any last questions about our study? Any comments? Anything you think you take away from this as a lesson?
You have to do what the Lord says.
That's right.
God is forgiving up to a point. When he's done, he's done.
Yeah, 'cause he didn't.
He has-
Yeah, it was done.
He has lots of grace.
Yep.
But when you tell God to kiss off and leave you alone, He will give you exactly what you want, as much as it pains Him. I think probably the biggest thing for me, and looking back
Do you
over
want
it
these
again,
back, King? No? Okay.
we'll make more.
Okay. I'll try to remember.
The thing that comes back to me is just, and I think it's what the author is looking at here, is contrasting Saul and David. When Saul was faced with an issue, he freaked out. He believed in God, not very much. He was mostly concerned about how he would appear, what people would think of him, how he was going to get this pulled off with what was available to him. He went in dark directions. He got depressed. He got anxious. He was fearful. He was full of anger and rage. All these negative things. He was willing to not consult the priest, but to consult a spiritual medium to get some information from the netherworld, rather than to consult the Lord Himself. Maybe he's finally realized that God is not going to answer him anyway. It wouldn't do any good. Okay, and we see that he just goes down and down and down and down, creeping, growing separation from God. But what we see with David is very different. He does have trust in the Lord his God. He believes in His power. He believes in His presence. He believes that he is anointed to be the King of Israel. And even when things are a little dicey, he knows that God is going to give him victory. I'm going to be the King of Israel. He has promised. What God has promised, He will do. So I don't know how He's going to work it out, but I'm going to trust that He's going to work this. Even in those moments where he kind of got a little farther away from God than he should have been, he didn't get so far away that he couldn't come back. He realized his wandering. He realized the separation, and he came back to God, looking for His instruction, looking for His guidance, seeking His blessing. And then when everything turned out, he gave God blessing and praise and glory and shared generously with everybody because God had been so good to him. I mean, these two men could not be more different at this point. I sort of imagine that even physically, these men are very different. Saul is tall, head and shoulders above everybody else, regal, royal, looks the part. I always assumed, really dark hair, big dark mustache and beard, purple robes, the whole 9 yards. I always imagine that David is
Ordinary?
well, he's more average size, nothing really special to look at. He's kind of ruddy, kind of reddish. I think he probably has that blush that 18-year-old boys get, those really red cheeks. I just have this image that he is way less confident in himself, and physically they don't look alike. Spiritually, they're not alike. As leaders, at least at this point, they're not much alike either. So.
Is there anything in there that would tell us the ages of them when all this was going on? The ages of David and Saul?
The belief is that David was probably around 17 when he fought Goliath.
Okay.
So he's probably, I forget exactly how long all this is. I mean, he was on the lam from Saul for a few years. So I imagine he's probably mid-20s.
And how old was Saul?
We don't really know. Old enough to be the father of David's good friend.
Now, is Saul's son mentioned again?
Oh, because David and Jonathan were the same age?
Well, I figure they're a lot closer in age than David and Saul.
Okay.
I mean, I have read some people who have believed that Jonathan was probably more like a trusted advisor, a little older, a little wiser than David. All the flannel graphs that I saw as a child, Jonathan and David were, peas in a pod. They would have been in the same glee club, the same soccer team, the same everything as young men.
So is Saul's other son that lived mentioned again?
Yes.
Okay. And Samuel too?
Spoiler alert.
Okay.
Spoiler alert. Yes, we'll read more about Saul's family. They're not all gone. Remember, he's got these girls too, one of whom is going to get to come back to David, unfortunately. All right, so we will pick up with 2 Samuel next time, which will be in 2 weeks, because next week is fall break and I'll be in Indiana for a wedding.
I'll be in Texas.
Come see us again soon.
I'm going to Texas.